Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Coaching Hub Conversations. This is a partnership between Cardiff Met Sport TV and the Coaching Hub academic group here at Cardiff Met University, who provide cutting-edge, trusted, robust research on sports coaching to inform practice and coach education. Now, what we want to do with these Coaching Hub Conversations is to speak to world-class coaches about their practice out in the field, and we've got an absolute legend of athletics, a world-class athlete in his day and now a world-class coach. James, you're now an academic as well, using coaching theory to help improve your coaching. You recently did a piece of academic work where you decided to structure it on the ghosts of Christmas past. Now, I think that shows a bit about your creativity, your unwillingness to stay within the sort of restrictions of some academic work, but it also gives us a bit of structure. And it's Christmas, so we'll be looking at your coaching past, your coaching present, and your coaching future. So starting way back at the beginning of your coaching journey, what sort of coaches inspired you, maybe when you were an athlete? Which ones motivated you? Which ones got the best out of you? What sort of coaches did you respond best to?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me on the couch. So it'd be good to chat a bit of theory and practice. So I was very lucky as a young child, going through secondary school to have opportunities to play all sports. I kind of found that running suited my kind of personality, and so went down that route in terms of clubs and then coaches. My first coach, was someone that helped give a bit of structure to what I was doing. Obviously, conversations about, correct training practices, training in a group with similar athletes of, aspirations and what they were trying to achieve. So that was the kind of, sort of grounding to my my kind of, love or, thought processing into, what it takes to be an athlete to go to the next level. Within that, then, I came to university and then you kind of, train with other people. I was starting to take a bit more control over what I was doing, and then I reached out and was coached by one of the top coaches in the UK at the time, Mark Rowland, who is now Oregon Track Club head track coach over there. And again, that was an amazing experience for around about 18 months where I learned actually what it really takes to be a high class, high performance athlete, but also learned that there's no magic wand. There's no easy path. It's just the simple things done, week in, week out, day in, day out. And then it got to a point in that part of my career where I actually started coaching myself. So fairly unique in comparison to a lot of my my colleagues and peers, where they obviously had their coaching setups, their plans, but I took control of what I was doing, which gave me control, gave me understanding. So I was almost a coach trapped in an athlete's body. I made lots of mistakes, but I also had some successes as well, and maybe doing that in my own career, that's obviously then led me on to becoming a coach in my later running days.
And your coach journey, or your journey from athlete to a senior coach and a world-class elite coach, there's always been academia behind that. You were here in the late 90s, you came back here in the late noughties. Can you tell us now what you're doing in the academic field alongside your coaching work? You're doing a DSc or?
Yeah, I'm currently doing a taught doctorate in sports coaching.
So taught doctorate in sports coaching, yeah. What is that and what are you focusing on?
Well, for someone like myself that has a busy life, as in, a full-time senior lecturing job, I'm director of, Cardiff Met Athletics. I obviously do a bit of broadcasting. I've got 2 lovely children and a lovely wife, and a coaching group that, has obviously got internationals, ranging from all abilities. So doing a taught doctorate gave me the chance to, get back into the classroom a few times a month, expose myself to, world-class lecturers and also people from other sports and other backgrounds in their coaching fields. But it also gave it a manageable chunk of modules that you could, get your teeth into, get assignments done, break them down, and then move on to the next stage. And it kind of really helped me understand myself as a coach. Because, one thing with, it was Kevin Morgan who approached me about coming onto the program. and it was about the coach as opposed to, you know, a lot of things out in coach education. And we'll probably get onto that later, as a bit of a bugbear of mine, that is very much about, you know, training principles, about, you know, periodization, about planning, but it doesn't really talk about the coach themselves and what the coach goes through. Whereas when I looked at the content of the Talk Doctorate, that it was very much about us developing ourselves as coaches and our practice, but obviously how that then influences our environment, because ultimately as coaches you want to create the right environment for athletes to go on and perform. And so having that opportunity and then almost looking at it and thinking, actually, you know, the environment that I didn't quite have as a coach myself, as an athlete myself, because I wasn't coached and didn't have a group around me at certain times when I probably would have wanted one. I now had a chance to almost understand more about what I was doing, because I was obviously having some success, but it was almost, you know, why are certain things working, but also how I can improve as a coach. You never want to stand still. And so when someone offers you and you get that opportunity to really delve into your practice and, you know, and actually take it to the next level, it was a big sell. So yeah, I think for someone in a busy life, then Talk Doctorate really fits that for anyone.
And you're looking in particular at emotional labour for a coach. What does that mean in practice? Is it about a coach holding back their own emotions? Is it about controlling the emotions of the athlete? Or you talked about focusing on the coach themselves. So what is that major part of your thesis on emotional labour?
Yeah, I mean, that's the part I'm in right now. So I've gone through the module basis of the course, and I'm now into my final thesis that's talking about emotions of distance running coaching. It's almost a subject that is there, you know, predominantly all the time as a coach, but you know, it's very little that's been written about it and discussed about it. You know, it doesn't formulate a massive part of coach education. But you know, emotional labour is kind of, you know, based off, you know, sort of the work of Hochschild, where, you know, we as coaches, when we turn up to coaching, you know, we're the outward smiling positive person. But you're absorbing a lot of, you know, things in terms of processes, and it can be stressful, you know, coaching, and people have problems and it doesn't always go to plan. I think, you know, we look at all of us that have come through the last 18 months of the pandemic, where, you know, if you know, in the environments we're in, if we've got to be positive and we've got to, you know, help people and structure what people do. But there's also uncertainty and worry and, you know, life problems that are going on for us as coaches as well as people, whether that's in, you know, work, business, family. But you ultimately have to go out and kind of like put this kind of sometimes a coaching face on.
Yeah, I definitely see that with you. I mean, we see a lot of coaches in action on this campus, and some, I won't name names, but you can see when they're in a bad mood and there's a scowl, and they might use that as a sort of intimidatory sort of factor, whereas you are always super positive. Is that deliberate? Is that hard work? Is that tiring?
Yeah, no, I think that's where it comes down to emotional labour, that it can be tiring. I mean, it comes down to trying to be a bit, you know, I'd like to think, you know, being authentic as a coach. You know, I think you'll get found out after a while, so that you know, it needs to be something that you can hopefully maintain. But it doesn't mean that, you know, you almost need a skill set to then deal with the you know, the offset of those emotions and you know, coping with, you know, the emotions in coaching, in the emotions of other people, and a lot of that links to your kind of emotional intelligence, which is almost like a skill set as a coach. Again, that isn't taught in coach education, isn't spoken about as much, and a lot of it is about understanding your own emotions, but understanding how other people respond, how other people
and the middle distance
react.
runner doesn't have a sort of half-time team talk like a football or rugby coach or a basketball coach or a timeout.
No.
You know, so you've just got to press the right buttons in training, the night before a race, just before a race. Would you ever shout at an athlete after a race? Is that just not your style? Or?
Well, that's what it comes down to, is almost that, you know, that tailored nature and you know, the tailored emotions that come with individuals and understanding the environment you're in at that exact moment. You know, you definitely don't want to be someone that you know, over responds to something and you cause a real rift in a relationship. You've seen that in many team sports, you know, where, you know, a halftime team talk can actually lose a dressing room or, you know, or lose a player to you. And so it's a real delicate, you know, issue. And obviously you've got, you know, other things going on in their lives as well. So it's trying to balance that. And I think that as a coach, as I said, is almost the unwritten kind of skill set where, you know, you're coaching people. you're not just prescribing training programs where robots are going to go out and run. There's an emotional side to it. So without recognizing that, but I think one of the things that coming back to the kind of emotional labor and this developing emotional intelligence, things that have helped me is having people like really high quality mentors to speak to. So within the the DSE, talking to the tutors within that and going through the theory of it.
Yeah, there's one I want to mention.
Yeah.
Professor Robin Jones, a
Yes.
hugely respected academic in sports coaching here at Cardiff Met. He talks about coaches living their theory. Do you feel like you're living your theory out now?
It's the lived experience. I mean, Robin, for me, when I first sat down and started to listen, it was, light bulb moments were going off. Robin has a way of, putting across the theory, but also bringing it to life as well. When you read his papers, and there's, really great ones about like, wearing the coaching mask, the highs and lows of coaching, the unseen part of coaching. And that really resonated with me because, I obviously was comfortable in the theory. I'd read a lot around, training plans, programs. I put them into place myself. But the one thing I didn't feel prepared for were all the other bits to coaching that you don't really talk about sometimes. And I think Robin really brings out the kind of, the understanding on it, but also the fact that it's okay to talk about these things, that coaching isn't always rosy, isn't always, plain sailing, but, you kind of learn from your mistakes. I think it's Silkin put that it's kind of intelligence from failure, that you kind of learn from your mistakes. I mean, as coaching, I always apologise to athletes that I coached in the very beginning, that I didn't get it right, because you kind of have to learn through those athletes to then, tailor it to the athletes that come through after. And that's part of the coaching journey, really. And
do you find by doing your study alongside your coaching, you're becoming a better coach, you're thinking more about what you do, and you're taking things like Christian Edwards mentioned to me about folklorian practice. Is that something you'll find drifting into your coaching, or is it just something that the academic work is separate? Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating when you think you're almost what you're doing is individual, or you think that nothing has been similar, and then you sit down and read a paper. And for me, there was a paper by Dennison and Mills that was almost about my kind of coaching environment, and you're almost seeing your coaching, philosophy. You're seeing your kind of, what you do, as a coach written down, and there's a theory to it. So I think that's something that is reassuring as a coach, that you can actually really kind of underpin what you do, and it gives you confidence in what you do. And a lot of the work of Dennison and Mills is about not creating these docile athletes through. Yeah, that's the one. Dr. Christian Edwards, obviously, who runs the football here, he was very keen for you to talk about the work of Jim Dennison and this idea that maybe things like using technology can prevent an athlete from becoming docile. Is that something you feel resonates with what you do? Absolutely. I mean, in the world we're in right now, things like technology, they're there, but there's also ways, and people might think about distance running as being very prescribed, or how creative can you be with distance running. My one of my studies as part of the Doctorate was looking at creativity within distance running coaching. And it was about things like collaboration. It was about innovation, and you look at certain sports that have done that very well. And in my own sport, even just changing the language you use, or even changing the environment. For example, when we train on the outdoor track here at King Coyd, rather than running in lane 1, which is the normal lane that everyone runs in because it's 400 metres, we actually run in lanes 5 or 6. So the athletes run to feel. So they actually get to think about how they're running, and then run to time. So everyone runs the same time. So it's not just you're going to run 1,000 metres, I'm going to run 1,000 metres. We're going to be different times. You're then going to have what recovery. It's all going to be a bit misshaped and a bit mismatched. Whereas running in the outside lanes for us gives people a bit of thought into what they're doing. You want people to take ownership. You want people to think about why they're doing things and how they're doing them. And that's really important to me, that athletes have a bit of ownership in what they do. What you don't want to be is that overpowering coach that is just barking orders, shouting this. If you don't do this, you're out. No, we've seen you in action. We've seen you on the bike. It always looks like a really innovative, creative, imaginative training session. It's not just athletes pounding around a track. Yeah. It definitely feels when we're out filming that there's a lot more going on. I want to talk about technology and innovation. and how it came onto this campus a couple of years ago. I remember seeing a group of your athletes running around the track in a sort of arrowhead formation.
Yep.
I saw someone else flying a drone above that formation. There was a tent with a full of sort of guys on computers taking stats, and I was immediately curious, but it was all top secret. And I then found out what it was about, and I wasn't allowed to do any features on it because it was top secret. So can you tell us a little bit about what that project was, who you were working for or towards, because it was the greatest athlete in the world trying to break the unbreakable. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it was the 159 project. It was, Eliud Kipchoge's attempt at, being someone to climb Everest, to break the 4-minute mile of marathon running. And so again, going back to, the kind of collaboration, creativity, innovation, it was all there in this project. Again,
all here on this campus too, isn't it? They come here because I think there was an ex-student, Aaron Ackerman, from the School of Performance Analysis. So that combination and community you talk about and collaboration, that all seemed to come together. But I just love it that the world's greatest athlete came to you and came here for some support in what he was trying to do.
Yeah, so I mean, it was ultimately about trying to maximise science, technology, but actually someone had to believe, and the coach had to believe, that they could still break the barrier. So it was a great mix of kind of, belief, obviously, of planning, but also, that collaboration between ourselves.
That formation they were looking at, what exactly was that arrowhead formation of the runners around him while he was trying to break the record?
It was about drafting and about the transition of pacemakers in and out of, because to break the 2 hours, to have a pacemaker that could go as long as they could, they weren't going to fulfill above 30 kilometers. So they decided that because it was going to go, they were going to go for sub 2 hours as opposed to breaking a world record, and it being ratified as a world record, that pacers would come in and out. So there'd be groups of pacers that would have this formation, and they did it in wind tunnels. They did it with us at
it's like a peloton almost.
On the track here. We did it at Lando racing circuit, and it was also about the way that you could filter in and out a pacing group effectively without impacting the runners' rhythm, without impacting their the amount of draft that they had from the runners. And they found that it helped percentage wise in terms of the running.
And you used that formation when they did the.
So we tried loads of different formations. And again, the runners here, some of them were past, present, and some future Cardiff Met students. I mean, for them, they knew what they were being part of, but they couldn't talk about it either.
It was actually made into a documentary. I think Ridley Scott was involved.
Yeah, Ridley Scott was the producer. So, but I think to see that, and then the messages on the day when they saw the formation, and I was doing live commentary for Eurosport, so I had a bit of a proud moment of seeing on screen what we'd replicated. And when we did it on the track, everyone wanted to be Kipchoge. So I'm going to be Kipchoge this time. So to see it actually happen, something that in my lifetime I didn't see happening, and to have a small little kind of part in that process, but also, as I said, to see that to do something of that magnitude, that it was so many different pieces coming into play. But it was also technology of the shoes. It was technology of the surface. It was, but it was innovation as well. So it was an amazing kind of thing to see how science. But it also came down to that Eliud himself believed he could do it. And again, so it's not hiding the fact that there's still an emotional side to the runner and the coach as well. That pressure's on them to do it on that day. Because if you're going to pick a time on a date and that's the day, then you've got to be physically ready, but also emotionally ready to perform on that day.
I want to bring you back to the fact that as well as being an elite coach, that you're also a top-level broadcaster. You've just got back from commentating in Valencia. You talked about commentating on the Breaking 2 Kipchoge attempt. To what extent do you find that being a broadcaster, I know you just mentioned how you look at coaching in terms of the language they use, and that's a big part of broadcasting. The emotion you must have to take into broadcaster when an athlete is winning. Do you find working in the broadcast space as well helps you as a coach being able to deliver your message?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky whenever I do any kind of broadcasting. My wife always jokes that, I was practicing for years before I ever got my first kind of gig, because I was a student of the sport. I read every running magazine. I've got every running biography. I talked to everyone, and this was years before I'd ever been
done
given
all
a
the
mic.
research, yeah.
And then all these random stats and these ability to kind of like, I forget family birthdays, but I can remember what someone ran in 1998 for their debut marathon. These are the kind of things that, I don't know, it's almost like a skill, but it's I'm equally blessed and cursed in that respect. I seem to forget normal stuff, but as I said, I can remember statistics that are, but then they come out in the in broadcasting, and hopefully I'd like to think that it's I'm a fan of the sport. So we were talking about Valencia and being over there and being able to see the finishing line, and I feel really privileged that I have a front row ticket for some of the best events in the world. And I get to talk about them and hopefully, bring across a bit of passion to it, a bit of detail to it. But also I can talk about, some of the athletes that I'm coaching are involved sometimes. I've got a super exciting marathon talent in Jake Smith that, I could well be commentating on him, doing something very special in the marathon in the not too distant future. And that's really exciting when you're able to talk about what you're part of as well.
Do you ever think that might be difficult at some point? You talk about emotions as a coach. You'll be there as a broadcaster. You might have to be impartial. Jake might run well, might not run so well. He might watch it back and think, "Oh, what are you talking about there?" Are you aware of that balance?
You've got Jeff Whiteman, who is the Olympic stadium announcer, and his son is in the stadium running in those same races. So, I mean, my levels of problems broadcasting wise are nowhere near that. I don't know how Jeff, for a second, is able to commentate whilst his son's running in the first round, let alone major championship finals.
If you're commentating over Jake in a massive race, you are going to get excited, aren't you?
Oh yeah, but I'd like to think if it was obviously broadcasting wise, you won't hear it until back. But hopefully it gives the viewer a bit of insight. You wouldn't really have a manager mic'd up at the weekend. Imagine I'm a Tottenham fan, Conte mic'd up whilst Tottenham were playing. Hopefully you would get a great bit of emotion. So obviously keeping it unbiased sometimes, because you'd have to be slightly unbiased. But yeah, hopefully it'd be a unique kind of experience to the viewer where you're getting the highs and hopefully not any lows of what's happening.
Staying with sort of tech and innovation and media, how you use social media as a coach is fascinating. It's really positive, but also when the lockdown came, you're one of the first coaches to jump onto YouTube, use the live stream capability, keep your community strong. Are you always looking for new ways, new platforms to keep your athletes together, get your message out, build what is a brand, Team Thie? And a lot of coaches are intimidated by social media, or might keep their athletes away from it, or might not know how to use it. You're the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, almost going back to my study regarding creativity. I was actually doing a kind of mini project, as part of the DSC about coaches trying to be creative and before lockdown it was using skipping ropes, it was walking backwards drills, it was some little subtle language, and then lockdown hit. And every coach, not just in the UK, in the world, under the same parameters. It's almost a unique study almost where, you could no longer coach your group face to face. You can no longer use the same facilities. You can no longer kind of, do your normal day to day. But athletes are still needing support and still needing structure and still needing something to keep their motivation. So you're either creative or you failed as a coach almost. So you had to be creative, I think.
But putting yours live on YouTube, that's where the athletes are, that's where the youngsters are. It was going to be very natural for them to switch onto YouTube and then find you running a session.
Yeah, and this Team Thie circuits is now almost
still going.
We're up to 104 now. So we had 100th episode.
And how many people tuning in?
We still get cut 100 to 300 people a week. Some people do it on playback. Some people hit it live. I get a message a week from at least 2 people that I had no idea were doing the circuits. Some of them really good old running friends. Some of them, we've got different acquaintances and links, and some just knew that they've just found it, or their running buddy said, "I'm doing this circuit." And it's every Monday 6 o'clock, and it's got this kind of community to it. And I think it was one of those where as a coach you just want to feel like you're doing something, and it's a very strange environment where, a bit like we're sat here, you're doing the circuit, but you're not seeing it, you can't see anyone, The chat function that someone told me on about week 6 I could open up if I made it on a certain setting. So then I started to get like messages back during
Joe
it.
Wicks, yeah.
But I didn't know at the time you could do that either.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I learned as it went on, and as I said, you know, I've had really nice response back, and there's junior internationals that are doing it the other side of the UK. There's people internationally still doing it. But the best story was that we were at the European 10,000 meter championships in Birmingham. It was the European Cup, sorry. And it was our Olympic trials, and on the infield, a German athlete came up to me and he's like, "Oh, coach, I must meet you." And so I was like, "Oh, hi." He goes, "I do your circuits." And I was like, "What?" I said, "You just beat Mo Farah. You just finished 5th." And this guy called Niels Volt had just finished 5th in this race. Said, beaten Sir Mo. And luckily I had one of my really good trusted athletes with me, Tom Marshall. And he looked at me as if to say, "No." And I said, "Tom, remember that." And so he's like, "We must have a picture together. So thank you so much." And Tom said, "I bet you're going to say next, this result's only down to your circuits." And he said, "Yes, that result today is only down to your circuits." So
brilliant.
Little things like that
it just shows the impact it can have.
Make it worthwhile. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Going back to Jake Smith, he's a really good case study. I know you've coached all sorts of wonderful athletes and have some great young athletes in your squad at the moment. But Jake's fascinating for us. He came here as a sort of raw athlete, and you've been with him on this journey as a developing athlete. You've had to hold him back a little bit sometimes.
I struggle with that sometimes.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about what you've learned as a coach managing Jake's progress.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fascinating athlete to coach and an absolute joy. You sometimes tear your hair out, but I've got a good head of hair at the moment. So
he's a bit of a maverick, isn't he?
Yeah, I kind of almost nicknamed him that. And
are you a maverick as well?
Yeah, I raced in Madison Square Garden at 1 a.m. UK time and flew back and raced in the UK champs and made the world champs team. So I did things that were slightly off the normal scale. I did, trap meets in the Amazon in Brazil. And
so you encourage that in your athletes?
I'd like to think that, again, it's going back to that, taking ownership and not having docile athletes and having athletes that run with a bit of emotions and also kind of like take they enjoy what they do. I want people to enjoy it, because I think that if people enjoy
Jake is always smiling when he runs, which must intimidate other athletes.
It does, and with someone like him, you want to keep him raw. There are training principles that you have to do, and there's training, and he's someone that loves it. So you do, as you said, have to hold him back sometimes, and that's part of the challenge. Is when you're getting to the level Jake's at, is how much do you push, how much do you hold back. But when you've run a 60, and a half, half marathon, and you're third all-time Brit, and the stuff that we've seen him do other distances, it's so exciting. But yeah, he went and ran a marathon when he wasn't supposed to finish.
Yeah.
It was the fastest under 23 marathon by a Brit of all time, fastest debut of all time by a UK athlete. But it signposted him to the rest of the running community that this is the guy that has the marathon future of the UK on his shoulders.
Feels a little bit, the last person who sat here was Gareth Baber, who coached Fiji to Olympic gold. And that idea of coaching amazingly skillful athletes, but still trying to give them some structure. So it seems that Jake runs on instinct sometimes and actually might throw the tactics out the window. But do you have to encourage that and let him do that and let him learn from that? Or do you sometimes have to say, you need to stick to the plan?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bit of both. There's certain parameters and rules that, say for example in a 10,000 meters, if you ran sub 60 for the first lap and you're not ready for that physiologically, it's going to go wrong. So there's certain things you can't do. Obviously, if you push too much in training, you might end up with injuries and illnesses, which you don't want. So, Jake's someone that, between us, we're really learning, and we have learned, so much. We're still learning as we go because he's still so young. The marathon is the next kind of, big, kind of thing to break. But we've already run one as a training run, and he ran that without any fluids, without a proper training long run going into it. So we kind of know where we are. And we've got some great people that are helping us and supporting us. And that's the other thing that I'm always, reaching out to people. Professor Andy Jones, who is down at the University of Exeter. We got Jake down to be tested by him. And the numbers that came back were special. And Andy was part of, testing the guys for the sub 2 hour project.
Right.
So he's tested the best marathon runners in the world.
Yeah.
And Jake's numbers were very, very good in comparison to those. So it was almost like, look, we kind of think we know what we've got, or I know what I've been looking at. And I've been telling Andy for 2 years, because I went down and had a coffee with him 2 years ago, and COVID got in the way of that testing. And he was a 62-minute half marathon runner at the time, and I said, this guy's going to run 60. And he had. And so when I took him testing, Andy said, what you said 2 years ago, you're spot on the money. So it was always nice to be right as a coach, but there's going to be a lot of talk in the next however months, but talk is cheap. And the marathon is unforgiving sometimes. So it'll be easy for us to pluck times out, say we're going to do this, do that, until Jake does that. And I do that as a coach from my point of view, then it's not the finished article yet.
We can go back to your structure of the coaches of Christmas past.
Yes, yeah.
Just this idea that as a young coach, the dream must be to coach in Olympic Games. It's the pinnacle for sport, pinnacle for athletics. This summer you went to Tokyo as part of Team GB. Has that made you hungry for more Olympic Games? What was that experience like in Tokyo? I know it wasn't a traditional Olympics because of the pandemic, but you were out there, you were coaching elite athletes. How was that experience? What did you learn? And we might talk about the Olympics of the future with potential runners like Jake Smith. But what takes us back to Tokyo this summer? What was your role?
Yeah, so I was out predominantly in the holding camp in Yokohama, and it was just different. I mean, there was even talk in the weeks leading into it whether it was going to happen, and obviously there was personal coaches couldn't go out, so therefore the team coaches that I was one of those were really pivotal, I'd like to think, in terms of just supporting athletes in their final preparations, and again going back to that, having a front row ticket and seeing some quality sessions, but also one of the first coaching sessions I was in charge of was Keely Hodgkinson, because her amazing friend of mine, Trevor Painter, wasn't out for her first session. And you've got one of the phenomenal talents in British athletics that she went on to get a silver medal in the 800 metres. But your first session is looking after, and again, you're having to obviously think about the language you're using, making sure that they're feeling positive. Because Trevor was like, right, you're going to look after her because I know you'll create the right environment for her.
A lot of anxiety for the athletes this time. Was there a lot of uncertainty?
Yeah, but it was also very, very hot and humid, and conditions were not great for endurance running. So it was actually trying to make good decisions, but also the session has an aim that you want the athletes to come away from the session going, I nailed that, but also you don't want them to have an issue within it. So I mean, that for me, experiences like that, I think you feel really privileged, as I said, when you've got the GB tops on.
Oh, that's what I mean. You've represented your country at the Commonwealth Games, you've been to the World Championships, but that Team GB at the Olympics, did it feel like a step up in the quality of athletes and facility and competition? And did it make you think, I want to be at Paris with an athlete at the next Olympics, or in LA after that?
Definitely.
Is it what drives you in some way?
I definitely think so. I think the pinnacle of our sport in track and field is the Olympics. As an athlete, I was, I could put my hand out and look at my fingertips, and that's how close I got to making the Olympic Games in 2004. And so as a coach, that next step, I've been very fortunate. I've coached, a Paralympic athlete. I've had, athletes that have got very close to the Olympics. And actually one of my former athletes, Jake Hayward, was actually, made the Olympic 1500 metre final, who's now coached by Mark Rowland, who used to coach me. So
it all comes round.
Everything goes round in cycles. So,
and you all keep sharing information and sharing best practice.
Yeah, well, I was able to help Jake in the holding camp, riding the bike, as you talked about earlier. So so looking after people in that respect. So it's really, as I said, it's great to be in that environment, absorb it, because it's not just what happens on the training track, it's what happens, off the training track, how people are recovering, resting, that environment around the hotel, and then them going into the competition, arena as well. So there's so much to learn as a coach. I'm still learning that, that for some team coaches and athletes that were there, they've been to multiple games. I've been to, Commonwealths and Worlds and Euros, but not the Olympics. So it was it's a big learning curve as well. So what, you do come back, pretty fatigued as well. That again, the hidden kind of emotional labour of things that you come back, and I felt like someone put a pin in me, because you have to be upbeat the whole time. But there's a lot of worry, especially things around COVID. We had athletes that were having to isolate. There was other uncertainty about injuries, illnesses and stuff that you absorb, but you're then going out into the coaching practice. And you're less of a coach out there, more of a kind of facilitator and a kind of probably a motivator. So hopefully if that was my role, I did it effectively.
And I want to talk about this place, Cardiff Met, the King God campus, the School of Sport and Health Sciences. We often talk on Cardiff Met Sport TV about CF236XD, and we call it the most important postcode in Welsh sport because of what happens here, and because it's this incubation of ideas and innovation and great coaches. And so how does that feel that you're part of the tradition now of the likes of Sean Power or the late Mitch Fenner, the great Lynn Davis? You know, what does that mean to you? How does it add to your coaching experience, the fact you're part of this community? And obviously those guys are from the past, but you're part of the present now. So take us to a sort of a wet Tuesday night where you could be on the track, rugby could be on the 3G, football are on their pitch. What's that like when you look around at what the other coaches are doing? Yeah,
I mean, super lucky when you walk through the coffee shop and you see various people that you know. And I think on a training night, you know, to look over and see Christian Edwards there, you know, with the football team there, looking in the infield of the rugby, having a wink at Danny Milton to make sure the rugby balls don't come on the track.
And these are coaching academics as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're people that, you know, we're having various conversations, you know, linking in. Danny Milton got me linked in with Matt Cullen's community of practice study. So again, helping me as a coach, helping other coaches from other universities. So there's a real kind of, you know, learning DNA with a performance DNA as well. I think that's the important thing. It's that real nice mix of, you know, athletics and academics. But
do you push each other? You know, do you like the idea they're looking over at your session and thinking, oh, I wonder what he's doing? Or you're thinking, oh, that's an interesting looking drill, or their players look fit?
I think success, you know, breeds success, and I think that, you know, you look over and you do have a look over. I think what you do look over and see is positive environments, and you see engaged athletes, and you see, you know, big numbers as well. So you very rarely look over and see 3 people on the rugby 3G, or the same in the football. It's multiple of people. You know, their sports are slightly different to ours, where they almost have to be there, otherwise they won't be in the starting, you know, team at the weekend or on a Wednesday at Bucks. The only difference with ours is that you don't have to be there. So ours is a little bit more, you know, kind of self-control of that. Yeah. But I think, you know, that in itself, you know, that's the individual nature of our sport, and the fact you could go and do the training sessions on your own somewhere. But that's why it's so special that people are drawn here. And those numbers you see on a Tuesday, people are driving, you know, 50, 60 miles to come to our training sessions.
Yeah, you seem to create... Yeah, you seem to create a team. You seem to create a team environment within an individual sport.
Yeah,
which is...
yeah. I think that's it in a nutshell. Where, you know, it's a collective group, you know, all with individual goals. And I think that, you know, my job again is to kind of create that environment and facilitate it. I've got, you know, Steve Mitchell, who alongside me is doing, you know, fantastic work as well. And I think, you know, between us and other people, that it's, you know, people want to be there. And we've had people that have come to us, done undergrads, gone to the US, got a master's degree, but then they've relocated and come back to Cardiff because something's calling them and they want to be part of something. Yeah. So again, you know, that's a huge compliment to us and what we do. But going back to, you know, the traditions of your Lynn the Leap Davises, your Sean Powers, your Scott Simpsons, you know, such a rich tradition in NIAC and, you know, and
do you feel when we
Cardiff
talk about
Met athletics, when
we talk about the coaches of Christmas past,
yes,
do you feel they pass stuff on to you, which you'll pass on to the next generation of coaches? These young athletes you're coaching might be the coaches of the future. Is there knowledge being passed along?
I think you could, you know, as you know, you can't hide history. You know, history is always there, and Foucault and other authors will always say you're kind of guided by your history and as you said, you know, your lived experience. So, you know, as I said, I think that, you know, we have that DNA, we have that that rich tradition at Cardiff Met. We're very lucky to have the home in NIAC, and history is all around you as well. And it still looks great for a building that is, you know, 21 years old now. It still, you know, fits the bill. It's still the only campus-based 200-metre track in the UK. So no one's called us up yet. You know, but, you know, to host our own meets there.
It's still great for our broadcast students to see the likes of Jamie Bolsh or Christian Malcolm or Colin Jackson in there, Sam Gordon. They're just knocking around.
Yeah, they are.
Coaching,
they are. And then we can have meets like the Christmas Classic. Yeah, that is 7 hours of Christmas music and Santa dashes, and then we can have our students jump in like we had, you know, Matt said at the dual meet, being able to jump on the mic and actually learn, you know, to be a broadcaster in our own events.
Does this environment help a coach get to the next level?
I think that for me, what it's helped me is, that being exposed to, as I said, other coaches, whether that's been in the classroom, whether that's been seeing them out in the field, amazing, lecturers and people that you could really learn from. Christian came he taught Doctorate and talked about changing the position of a whiteboard and how you might view that and talk about that. And obviously Robin Jones and his amazing kind of theories and discussions.
Yeah, and Christian looks at humour in football, humour in coaching, humour in the dressing room. Is that something you use?
I think that you've got to have that kind of fun and that that bit of enjoyment in what you're doing, and I think for me it comes back to being authentic, and I think that's definitely with Christian something that you come across, that he's authentic when he coaches, but it's also passion as well. I think that yourself as a coach, you've got to have a bit of passion and show that, and a bit of emotion. So it goes back to emotion, doesn't it? So and actually get your message across. And
you clearly get a buzz out of it. But how do you measure success for you if a athlete turns up here as a fresher? Is it just for you about making that athlete a better athlete by the time they leave, or for them just to have an enjoyable experience? So as a coach, how do you measure success? Is it medals and PBs? Or?
It's a great question, and there's a few different answers to it. Again, it's a little bit individual to the athletes. So, I've had lots of different athletes come through. I think one thing as a coach, especially in athletics, that athletes are borrowed to you. You don't own them. I myself had a couple of coaches and then coached myself. I helped Josh Griffiths when he was here, and then he went on to coach himself and was first London Marathon finisher in the UK in his marathon debut. But when I look at someone like him, and there's a few others, and I look at people that are coached by their coaches now, what I love is that a majority of athletes that I've helped are still running and enjoying their running far more years after they've graduated from here. So one of my worst fears would be to kill someone's love of running, would to injure them to a point where they couldn't go on and keep running. So but then ultimately, when you're turning up on a Tuesday and doing the training sessions, you want to improve. So if people aren't improving, or they're not getting personal best, they're not maybe if they're aspiring to win national medals doing that, then there is a performance element that great, you can enjoy it, but there's no reason why you shouldn't perform at the same time. So it's working that balance out.
So where are you in your coaching journey? What's next? Do you set yourself goals like you would set goals for an athlete?
Yeah.
And where are you on your academic journey? Are they sort of dovetailing, or do you think once you've got your PhD or finished your DSc, that'll be that bit done and you'll just be a better coach? So what next? And
I mean, my whole kind of learning journey, I never saw it going how it has. My career kind of petered off towards the end, where I started to coach a few athletes in the sort of 2009. I went and worked for a national governing body in Welsh athletics, and it was actually an email through from Sport Wales that came through saying, would you like to do a master's degree at Cardiff Met, part-time management leadership? And me and my colleague Chris Moss had a cup of tea and said that could be kind of fun, going and doing 2 days a month at university and going back. And so I got back in exposed, and it was here. And again, the likes of Nicola Bolton, Julia Longville, were just amazing people to learn from.
Was that leadership theory you were looking at?
Yeah, and do you know what? That was my first.
That must help now as well.
Well, that's what it was. It really helped me, and I think that learning also in an NGB, that when you went into a committee meeting, that people had agendas, people had different hats on that you couldn't see, but you could understand and read the room almost. And I suddenly realised the theory to what I was doing, even at an NGB in terms of a management role there, to then obviously coaching and the management and leadership within coaching. And then obviously that gave me the footing in to come back, and I was then doing practical athletics lecturing. I was then made director of athletics here. I then became part of the sports management team that was talking about it was elite sport, community sport, school sport that I'd obviously been through, and obviously having worked for an NGB gave me a great understanding of the working world, not just the sporting and academic world. And then it was that conversation with Kevin that was, look, we'd love you to come on board for the Doctorate. And again, I had that same, well, I'm learning, let's go and do it. Again, I hadn't really thought about doing it until it was put in front of me, and it was that opportunity and thinking, actually, this is a great chance. And then going back to that paper you talked about with the ghost of Christmas past, or I think it was the coaching journey that I've been on in terms of the past, the present, and the future. And for me, it was that ability in the course to actually be creative, and actually it didn't have to be just structured in a formal way. And that really resonated with me, with my coaching.
So you're applying that creativity you use in the coaching world to your academic work.
And that was celebrated.
I'm going to do things differently.
Yeah. And that, and it was actually, I was actually struggling at the time before I wrote that piece. I was sat, it was this time of year almost, I was sat at home with my kids and we were watching the Muppets Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
And I was trying to write my first academic piece of work for the Talk Doctorate in an essay format. And I wasn't very inspired by it. I had lots going on at the time. And I was thinking, I'm not sure this is for me, and this is going back 4 years. And I kind of thought at that point that if I fall at the first hurdle, at least I had a go, at least I tried. And I sat there watching it and I thought, well, why don't I try and write it within, so it's the ghost of my coaching past, thinking about it, thinking about it in that relation, to, my journey, but then also seeing myself in the future. And seeing myself as a coach I didn't want to become, by being overprescribed, being a coach that was only coaching one or two athletes because I was told to by a national governing body, and everything was about spreadsheets, everything was about performance. You weren't even allowed, to be a bit of a maverick within that environment. And I kind of wrote about that, and I read the paper again last night, and I thought, that's quite a good paper. I was really proud of myself having written that. But it also then gave me the spark then that actually you could put your own stamp of individuality on it. You could be authentic within it. But there was also theory to the practice, and linking it. This was critical, creative, and transformative thinking in that paper. And that first hurdle, the fact I cleared it, and when Robin Jones turns around and says, "I really enjoyed reading your paper."
You're doing something right.
I almost literally just
Did you speak at a conference recently where you got a chance to talk about this sort of stuff?
Again, these are things that if you'd have told me a few years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. If I got asked to talk, it was the endurance conference, European Endurance Conference, and part of the British Milers Club conference. And if someone had said you're going to go and talk, I would have thought it'd be about training plans, about Jake Smith, about other athletes that I've helped. I went there and presented my work on creativity, on emotions in distance running coaching, and the amount of positive feedback and different federations that have come up and said, "Can you come and present to us? This is what's missing." British Athletics have turned around and said, "This is in our framework, hopefully to get more about mentors and community of practices in our delivery of coach education, but it's not there yet. But this really helps us kind of get the message out there." And so hopefully I can almost now start formulating, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved with the Talk Doctorate. It was not just for a personal development, but actually to make a change and, actually maybe, create something within that can have an influence on coaches. Because one of my pet hates of academia that it sits on shelves and the language is used that alienates people.
It's impenetrable, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not, and it doesn't help anybody.
It needs to be accessible, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's so many great theories and information and papers that I've read that they've not been translated. They've not gone theory to practice. They're just theory sat there. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that that you could, any of my work in the future, you can read and actually see a bit of yourself in it, which I did with Robin's work. I saw my own kind of self within his work. Obviously, he's on another scale to me altogether, so I wouldn't even put myself in the same bracket. But if I can get into that environment, what I do have, hopefully, is a bit of a voice. I have people that will, respect what I have to say, whether that's from an athlete coaching, being part of the sport, in terms of I deliver coach education, I'm part of, a national governing body, I'm one day a week Welsh Athletics as well at the moment. So, I'm in there, I'm in academics, on a day to day. So having that ability to translate things, but also not just my idea that everyone goes, well, that's okay, but that's not what I go through, that's not what I experience. But people going, wow, this guy's talking about what the problems and struggles I have, but also the great things of coaching. Because that's the other thing, is it's not a negative story. Coaching is amazing. The emotions when it goes well are far better than when I ran well as an athlete myself. So I want to sell this to young coaches, that people that are unsure whether they want to go into coaching, that actually the emotions of coaching are really great. When it's on, but making sure that those coaches, that it's not always going to go great. There's always going to be that first athlete that has a long-term injury. that first athlete that leaves you to go to another coach, that what you're going to feel like, but also then how do you process that? How are you going to come back better from it? That it's okay, everyone feels like that, or everyone feels similar to that. And you can process it, and so then you come back, and it's almost like a discussion. There's no one fit, but a bit like we're having now. If you discuss it with someone else, it makes a bit more sense, hopefully, and you can process it. And that's what I've done through my own thing with mentors and things like community of practice, is just talk about it or listen to people's experiences and go, yeah, it's really nice. And going back to the Olympics, hearing other elite coaches talking about how tired they've been since makes you go, oh, that's great, because that's how I've felt.
Yeah.
But it reassures you that it's okay to feel like that, and therefore then you go into the next kind of coaching session going, it's normal to feel a bit tired. I'm okay. I'm going to crack on. So yeah, so it's all part of the journey.
Well, it's amazing journey so far. Still going as a coach and as an academic. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for reliving your coaches of Christmas past, present, and future. Thanks for watching. This will also be available as a podcast. And all that remains to be said is Nadolig Llawen.
Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas.